Hey guys, welcome to Calm History. Tonight we're taking a sleepy little detour into the world of medieval love letters. Yes, the kind that involves quills, wax seals, possibly a pigeon with attitude, and absolutely zero smiling. Picture it, you're in a drafty stone chamber, hunched over a scarred oak desk that smells like candle wax and old vellum. The only sound is the scratch of your goose feather quill, and the occasional sigh from a monk in the corner who's been copying psalms since sunrise. Your hand cramps as you try, for the 5th time, to phrase, "I think you're cute," in a way that won't get you publicly flogged. You've just misspelled devotion again, blotting the expensive parchment with ink that took 3 days to steep in vinegar and iron salts. Romantic, huh? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been planning this letter for weeks. It's not like you can just text Lady Avellini and ask if she's still into falconry or whatever. Oh no. In your world, every word has consequences. One too many flower metaphors, and her brother might show up at your door with a lance. The scriptorium smells like beeswax, damp stone, and ink. You've already broken 2 quills today, and the 3rd is threatening to split right down the shaft. It's quiet, save for the distant clang of armor outside the monastery gate, and the occasional snore from Brother Bertram, who's meditating, again in the far alcove. But you are focused. Your love letter is finally taking shape, each word chosen like a knight selects his sword. You've copied a few choice lines from the Romance of the Rose, borrowed a saint's blessing for good measure, and ended with a poetic flourish about moonlight and undying loyalty. All standard for the 1380s. Still, you know what you're doing. The margins are clean. The Latin quotes are accurate, mostly. And you've managed to keep the ink blotting to under 3 spots, which, by monastic standards, is basically a standing ovation. There's something soothing about the process, in a strange, obsessive way. The parchment is smooth beneath your fingers. The quill sways with the rhythm of your thoughts. You even find yourself muttering the words aloud as you write. To Lady Avellini, who is more radiant than the spring. Then you trail off, because you're not quite sure what's more radiant than spring without sounding like you're trying too hard. More radiant than the midsummer moon? Possibly too dramatic. Than Brother Alric's forehead? Accurate, but inadvisable. You take a deep breath and look around. A shelf of illuminated manuscripts sits nearby, their gold leaf glinting like dragon scales. On one open page is a picture of 2 nobles exchanging roses with all the emotional warmth of a tax audit. That's courtly love for you. Historians still argue whether the whole, emotionless, style of medieval love had more to do with Stoic tradition, or just an inability to smile convincingly while wearing 40 pounds of brocade. Outside the monastery window, dusk settles on the cloister garden. You can just make out a pigeon pecking at a snail near the herb bed. You squint at it thoughtfully. You may need that pigeon later. A bell tolls in the distance, vespers. You stretch your back, blow gently on the wet ink, and begin rereading your letter with the grim determination of someone editing a wedding speech by candlelight. You smile once, instinctively. Then you stop. Smiling, in this context, would be deeply inappropriate. Not because it isn't romantic, but because if anyone caught you grinning like a fool while writing a private letter, rumors would spread faster than plague in a bathhouse. Medieval love was many things, but casual? Never. Even the idea of sending a love letter requires layers of caution. First, the writing. Second, the sealing. Third, the transportation, assuming you don't want the local bishop to intercept it and deliver a sermon about lustful heresies over the dinner table. But you are committed. Tonight, your words might cross castle walls, outsmart chaperones, and land straight into the hands of someone who once smiled at you during a maypole dance and made your knees buckle like overcooked parsnips. And if they smile again when they read your letter? Well, they'll never admit it. But maybe, just maybe, they'll send a pigeon back. You're still seated at your worn wooden desk, fingers now stained a respectable shade of scholar black from oak gall ink. The letter sits before you, dry now, its looping script giving it an air of someone far more confident than you currently feel. That's part of the charm, really. The letter is not just a declaration, it's a performance. A quiet one, yes, written in silence and solitude, but a performance nonetheless. Before you can seal it, though, you need more ink. And not just any ink. See, in medieval times, writing ink wasn't something you picked up at the monastery gift shop. It had to be crafted, usually from crushed oak galls, those odd bulbous growths on oak trees caused by gall wasps, mixed with iron salts, gum arabic, and vinegar. The result was a dark, almost purplish black ink that bit into parchment like time itself. Tonight your little ink pot is dry. Which means you're off to the tiny alcove just beyond the cloisters where the ink is brewed, sometimes called the still room. Though this one smells more like feet and failure than serenity. You pass Brother Cedric on the way. He raises a suspicious eyebrow, as if midnight ink refilling might be code for something scandalous. You nod solemnly, clutching your empty pot like it contains the bones of a saint. He nods back. This is how monks gossip, through highly charged silence. Inside the still room, the shelves are a tangle of labeled flasks. Gall. Sharp. 1343, vinegar. Bitter. Not wine. And mysteriously, do not smell this jar. You don't. You've learned. You gather what you need and mix with the practiced, slightly sleepy hands of someone who's done this too many times. As you stir, the mixture thickens, turning from thin gray to syrupy black, like a spell taking shape. You dip a scrap of parchment into the ink to test it. It's perfect, deep, rich, permanent. Ideal for a letter that needs to last the perilous journey ahead. But let's not forget the extra ingredients, the unspoken additions every writer includes. Some say adding a rose petal to the ink grants passion. Others claim that whispering the recipient's name over the ink 3 times ensures the letter will be well received. You don't exactly believe in that. But you do it anyway. There's something comforting about following the rituals. After all, love in this time isn't spontaneous. It's an art form. A performance framed by rules and softened by symbolism. Historians still debate how seriously people took these ink superstitions. Were they heartfelt gestures? Or simply the medieval version of nervously double-checking you spelled someone's name right? You return to your desk, ink replenished, and add a final flourish, your signum. Not quite a signature. Most people weren't even supposed to write their names, but a personal mark. A small drawing of a crescent moon and a sprig of rosemary, known only to you and, hopefully, to her. Then comes the finishing touch, a tiny smear of crushed thyme rubbed on the parchment edge. It's subtle, gentle, the kind of scent she might catch and think, "Was that thyme?" Or perhaps something stranger like, "Does this smell like stew?" There's an art to writing a letter that's sincere but also deniable. If anyone intercepts it, it should sound like a poem. If she reads it, it should sound like the truth. You sit back and admire your work. It's beautiful in its own awkward way. A little too much metaphor, maybe, and one sentence that kind of implies she resembles a goose. But otherwise, it's the finest thing you've ever written. You lean back. The candle sputters as if to say, "Finally!" You stretch your fingers, look at the ink stains on your sleeves, and feel something close to satisfaction. Now comes the real test. You need to seal it. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. Because this isn't just a letter. It's a battlefield. You'll need seals for privacy, for propriety, and most importantly, for plausible deniability. Outside, the monastery cat yowls like it's just read your first draft. You glance out the window. The moon is high now, casting long shadows across the courtyard stones. You pull the windows shut and gather your supplies. Wax. Stamp. A steady hand. And somewhere in the distance, a fluttering pigeon stirs on its perch. It doesn't know it yet, but it's about to become part of one of the most awkward, overcomplicated, and oddly touching courtship rituals the medieval world has to offer. You place the letter gently to one side, parchment slightly stiff from the ink, but warm with intent. It's not just a note. It's a diplomatic mission wrapped in poetry, disguised as a devotional, and guarded by 3 layers of medieval paranoia. Now comes the part you've been both dreading and secretly looking forward to, choosing the right phrasing for the courtly script. Not the handwriting itself, that's handled. No, you're now venturing into the real battlefield of medieval romance, metaphor, etiquette, and 14th century euphemisms for "I like you." You begin scanning your mental list of acceptable images. Birds, for example, are fair game. You can liken her to a swan, provided you don't imply she honks. Roses? Classic. But choose the wrong color, and it might imply funeral vibes or worse, impure intentions. Apples? Risky. That whole Garden of Eden thing gets messy fast. So far, your draft says? She's as fair as spring's first dew. Not bad. But also vague. Could be interpreted as saying she's damp. You scratch it out and replace it with a dawn-mirrored lake untouched by wind or war. Yes. That's good. Obscure enough to sound deep. And probably not offensive to her aunt. Because let's be clear, this letter will not go directly to her. It will pass through no fewer than 4 people before she ever lays eyes on it. Likely candidates include her chaperone, a page boy with literacy issues, an elderly steward who thinks all young men are devils, and possibly her pet lapdog if it gets bored. This is why the phrasing matters. Every sentence must function on multiple levels. Take your line. The stars themselves must envy your grace. It flatters. It references celestial beauty. And best of all, it doesn't mention ankles. Remember, visible ankles could ignite a scandal faster than a fire in the tapestry room. You're halfway through a clever couplet about loyalty when Brother Edmund, the monastery's only remaining optimist, wanders past your chamber and peers in. He gives you the look. You know the one. It's the, writing another dangerous letter at midnight, are we? Look. You smile politely, covering the parchment with your sleeve. Brother Edmund nods once, then says something that makes your quill pause mid-stroke. Don't forget the code, he murmurs. Too much clarity is rarely romantic. And he's right. You take a moment, then weave in an ambiguous line about longing wrapped in linen. That should buy you at least 2 layers of interpretive protection. Historians still argue whether courtly love was sincere affection or just an elaborate social game played with ink and glances. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's the point. Then again, maybe you're just sleep-deprived and trying not to sound like a lovesick goat. You pick up your quill again. The key, you've decided, is in restraint. No declarations of love. No mention of marriage. And absolutely no drawings of hearts. You tried that once. It looked like a malformed turnip. Instead, you end the letter with a reference to a shared moment, the festival of St. Crispin, when you both reached for the same honey cake. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. But it was a miracle. A brief flash in a world of arranged marriages, political alliances, and dry sermons about temperance. You let your quill rest. It's done. You roll the letter tightly, careful not to crease the corners. Then you prepare the wax. It must be heated gently. Too much, and it will burn and crack. Too little, and it flakes off like your resolve every time you see her near the rose arbor. The wax is red. A deep, velvety crimson. You pour it in a perfect circle and press your first seal into it. The image? A crescent moon crossed by a feather. Not your family crest. No, that would be too obvious. This is your secret sigil. The one you use when the message must whisper instead of shout. Seal 1 complete. You hold the scroll for a long moment, listening to the wax cool and harden with the softest click. Then you exhale. 1 seal down. 2 more to go. You set the first seal aside to cool, careful not to smudge its delicate ridges. That was the easy part, the seal meant for her eyes only. The one nestled closest to your truth, tucked into the center of a careful little storm of wax and words. Now you reach for another piece of parchment, not fine vellum this time, but something sturdier, rougher, meant to endure more scrutiny than sentiment. This is the second seal. The one crafted not for love, but for propriety. You sigh softly, because this letter is for the chaperone. And you have to convince her you're not the kind of man who writes about roses blooming after frost, with indecent frequency. So you write again. Same beginning, formal greeting, full name, honorifics you can barely pronounce. Lady Marjorie, Dowager of Westmere, keeper of the apricot orchard and all those who visit it. You're not entirely sure if apricot orchard is metaphorical. You hope not. Apricots are genuinely lovely. This letter is nothing like the first. No poetry. No trembling verbs. Just a respectful update. You're sending Lady Avellini a small note of congratulations on her embroidery prize at the last fair. How tasteful her color palette was. How dignified her threading technique. The sort of compliments that could never make it into a love ballad, but which carry power nonetheless. You include a quote from a popular devotional, just to be safe. Something about virtue being like a pearl, easily overlooked but immensely valuable when polished by discipline. A bit of a stretch, but at least it's not about thighs. Historians still debate whether these outer letters were genuinely believed or simply ignored by chaperones who'd seen too many teenagers staring longingly at each other over mead. But you write it with care anyway, because you don't want to give Lady Marjorie any reason to raise that one sharp eyebrow of hers. When it's finished, you fold it into a neat triangle and tuck it around the inner scroll. The real message is safely hidden inside, nested like a secret within a secret. Then comes the second seal. This one is yellow wax. Paler, milder, like a polite smile that says, "I am absolutely not in love with your ward, and certainly haven't written her 3 letters before this one." You press your household's official seal into it, a modest oak tree flanked by 2 doves. Strong, respectable, boring. Perfect. It's cooling now, gently firming into place like a good lie told with enough charm. You look at the bundle in your hand. 2 layers deep. 2 intentions wrapped together like a riddle. But you're not done. Because medieval life didn't just distrust love. It distrusted travel. Letters were fragile things. Parchment could tear. Wax could melt. Pages could be intercepted, opened, and resealed by curious monks, jealous suitors, or sheep who've been trained to sniff out scandal. Okay, maybe not the sheep. But you wouldn't put it past them. That's why you prepare a 3rd layer. A final seal. You wrap the whole scroll in oiled linen to protect it from moisture, dust, and over-inquisitive noses. Then you bind it with twine and knot it in the pattern that signals non-official, but permitted, a code that, according to some historians, originated in the French court and migrated across Europe like courtship itself. You add one last spot of wax, this time a dull blue, and press a simple circle into it. No crest. No name. Just a mark that says, "Deliver this. Don't ask questions." And now your love letter looks like a piece of government correspondence. Which is exactly the point. You hold it up to the candlelight, turning it slowly, admiring its layered complexity. It could be a religious tract, a land dispute, or a list of banns for a wedding. But it isn't. It's hope. A dangerous kind of hope. You place it into the basket waiting by the window. Tomorrow morning, at first light, you'll fetch your chosen courier. He has feathers. He hates you. But he's fast. And if he doesn't fly directly into a weather vane this time, your words might just arrive intact. 3 seals. 3 layers. And still, no smiling. Because in this world, smiling too early is how people end up disappointed. Or worse, married to the wrong person because of a misread metaphor. The pigeon is already giving you attitude, and you haven't even reached into the cage yet. His name, though he never acknowledges it, is Renaud, and he's the only bird in the loft who's been trained to fly the exact route from your abbey to Lady Avellini's estate. Renaud is fast, extremely territorial, and harbors an apparent vendetta against your fingertips. You lift the cage latch cautiously, offering him a bit of crumbled oatcake as a peace offering. He takes it, then pecks you anyway. Standard. The satchel you've sewn is small and tightly rolled, waxed against weather and secured with a ribbon the color of last year's mead harvest, deep gold with hints of trouble. It ties around Renault's leg without issue, though the bird flaps his wings irritably, as if to say, "This again?" He's not wrong. This is the fourth letter you've attempted to send. The last one ended up back in your own chimney thanks to a sudden storm and Renault's questionable sense of navigation. You found it days later, tucked behind a broom, smelling like soot and stale pride. Still, you try again. Because love, in the medieval world, wasn't about ease. It was about persistence, a long game of flourishes, metaphors, and stubborn birds with poor manners. You step outside into the chill morning air. The sun is a pale blur just clearing the eastern wall. Fog creeps slow across the cloister stones, muffling the world in a sleepy hush. Renault coos once, a gruff, judgmental sound, and then he's airborne, wings slicing the sky like parchment shears. And there he goes. Over the gate. Past the monk-tending bees. Straight toward the grey woods beyond the river bend. You watch until he's no more than a fleck in the sky. And now, you wait. Medieval mail isn't a guaranteed system. Between storms, predators, and sheer bad luck, the odds of a letter arriving intact and unopened are about the same as a troubadour refusing to rhyme heart with apart. Pigeons were the express couriers of their time, used by monasteries, military scouts, and occasionally eccentric nobles with strong opinions about cheese tariffs. Some scholars believe that certain pigeon lofts had their own dialect of coos, used to signal specific message types. Others think that's nonsense, possibly confused with monks who just really liked bird impressions. Either way, Renault is your best shot. And it's not just weather and predators that threaten him. He must navigate a medieval landscape full of unexpected dangers. Hawks trained by rival lords, chimney smoke thick enough to choke a horse, and, most perilous of all, hunters who mistake messenger birds for dinner. Renault, however, is no fool. He skirts low, wings tight, and flies close to the forest canopy. He knows this route. He's followed it before. Past the ruins of the old watchtower, across the field of wild barley, and over the shallow stream where shepherd boys sometimes gather to trade jokes about the bishop's comb-over. And all the while, your letter bounces gently against his leg, wrapped tight, three-sealed, and smelling faintly of thyme and ink. The real risk, though, the one you can't control, is interception. A message like this is a prize. Not for its content. No one sane would care about your slightly overwrought metaphor comparing her laugh to cathedral bells, but for what it represents, a potential scandal. And nothing spreads faster through castle walls than the scent of unsanctioned affection. You turn from the courtyard and head back inside, already imagining what might be happening at the other end of the flight path. Renault should arrive by early afternoon, assuming he doesn't pause to taunt a hawk midair like last time. With luck, the message will reach her chambermaid, who has been, allegedly, trained in the art of discreet mail retrieval. Allegedly. Still, the system is in place. The bird flies. The seals hold. The hope, somehow, remains. Back in your chamber you pace. You look at your hands, still ink-stained, still shaking slightly with the aftershock of bravery. You did it. You sent the letter. And now, all that remains is to wait. And to prepare yourself for the return of either a beautifully penned reply, or a feather tied to your windowsill with a single word. No. Somewhere over the barley fields and between two meandering creeks, Renault slices through the air like a judgmental feathered arrow, utterly unaware of how much depends on his punctuality. Back in Lady Avellini's household, the sky is a little brighter, the air tinged with the sweet, earthy scent of crushed violets in the herb courtyard, and inside her solar chamber, the mood is suspiciously calm. She's not pacing. She's not sighing. She's certainly not looking out the window every time a sparrow flaps past. She is, in fact, plucking a single discordant note over and over again on a lute that has not been tuned since Epiphany. Her lady-in-waiting, Celeste, is pretending not to notice. Perhaps a new melody? Celeste ventures, too casually. Avellini shrugs. I quite like this one. It sounds medieval. It sounds like a goat stepped on it. Avellini says nothing. Her eyes flick to the window. Nothing. You wouldn't know it to look at her, but inside she's brimming with anticipation, a kind of tightly wound hope laced with anxiety. Because even if Renaud does make it, and that's a rather large if, considering his well-documented hatred of chimney smoke and shiny objects, there are still layers of household protocol to navigate. First, the doorkeeper, who only admits messengers with properly waxed documentation. Then the undermarshal, who inspects parcels for suspicious scents, like wine or, gasp, cinnamon. And finally, the chamberlain's pigeon clerk, who once famously rejected an entire shipment of letters from France on the grounds that the birds looked uppity. But today, Renaud pulls off a minor miracle. He evades the falconers. He dives beneath a merchant's awning. And he arrives. Scruffy. Irate. Slightly ruffled from a near collision with a thatched roof. But very much alive. He lands on the dovecot rail just outside the servants' quarters, where he is spotted by Hilda, the scullery maid with a soft spot for grimy birds and forbidden romance. She squints, sees the telltale gold ribbon, and hurries up the garden path with the speed of someone who lives for drama. Within moments, the scroll is unfastened, wrapped in a linen napkin, and whisked up the back stairwell under the cover of a heavily laden bread basket. Celeste meets her in the hall with a raised brow. "Another bread delivery?" Hilda, ever the actress, replies. "One of them shaped like a scroll. Very ecclesiastical." And then, finally, it's in Avellini's hands. She doesn't open it immediately. No, first she checks the seals. Red. Yellow. Blue. She fingers the edge of the third seal and smiles, just slightly. Not enough to be caught. Just enough to breathe. Historians still debate whether noblewomen actually smiled upon receiving secret letters or whether their reactions were entirely internal, expressed only through subtle eye twitches and embroidery tension. Whatever the truth, Avellini keeps her composure. With deft fingers, she breaks the outer seal. Reads the polite chaperone letter. Nods once, as if judging a wine. Then she reaches the true scroll. The one pressed with your crescent moon and rosemary sigil. This, she opens slowly. The time scent wafts up. She recognizes the handwriting immediately. It's imperfect but earnest. And it brings color to her cheeks faster than the summer sun ever could. She reads it once. Then again. And then she folds it carefully, presses it to her lips, not a kiss, just a whisper, and tucks it inside a small painted box beneath her bed. A box where 3 other letters already lie. You may not know it, but you're building something. Layer by layer. Word by word. Outside the solar window, Renaud is preening smugly on the sill. He will not stay long. He never does. There's no time for gratitude in his line of work. But before he leaves, he gives a single coup. Avellini pauses. Then walks to the window. "I suppose you want your reply?" Renaud tilts his head. And waits. Avellini lifts the scroll once more, her thumb brushing the edge of your words as if they might crumble from tenderness. She doesn't sigh. She doesn't giggle. That would be far too common. Instead, she returns to her writing desk, carved walnut, inherited from an aunt who reportedly wrote nothing but ecclesiastical laundry lists, and pulls open the drawer that hides her own writing supplies, a small bottle of violet ink, a swan feather quill trimmed by a blind calligrapher in York, and a sheet of vellum so fine it could pass for silk if squinted at during twilight. She taps the quill twice, then begins. Her hand flows easily, without hesitation. Unlike you, she doesn't revise. She doesn't blot. She doesn't mutter half-finished metaphors into the air like a poet with a toothache. She writes with the confidence of someone who has practiced her entire life at being unreadable, and who secretly loves when someone dares to try. The letter is shorter than yours, but every word is calculated. She opens with a line about the weather, safe, chaperone approved. Then follows it with something a little more slippery. "The moon has not yet returned to full, and yet I feel it brighter tonight." You'd have to be a monk to miss the meaning. But should anyone intercept the letter, they might assume she's just really into astronomy. Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen were actually the authors of the romantic letters we find tucked in castle walls and manuscript margins. Some suggest hired scribes polished their prose. Others believe these women simply wrote better than their male counterparts. Judging by Avellini's letter, the latter seems likely. After finishing her note, she sprinkles fine ash over the ink to dry it, carefully blowing it off with a single breath. Then she wraps it in lavender-scented silk, ties it with blue twine, and adds a dried forget-me-not pressed flat between the folds. Her seal is green wax, embedded with her family's lesser-known sigil, a weeping willow bending toward a river. It is used only on personal letters, and only when she's willing to risk being understood. Then, with a practiced flick of her fingers, she fastens the scroll to Renault's leg once more. He glares at her. She returns the look. "No dilly-dallying," she murmurs. "And if you get distracted by that bakery chimney again, I swear I'll have you replaced with a hedgehog." Renault flaps twice, as if to say, "I'm insulted, but intrigued," and takes off. He clears the stone sill, ascends above the castle's herb garden, and disappears into the pale sky, carrying with him one of the most carefully coded flirtations the 14th century will ever not quite admit happened. Back in your abbey, you're pretending to read a theological tract about proper penance after sneezing during Vespers, but your eyes keep darting to the horizon. By evening, the clouds begin to change shape. And then, there he is. Renault. Soaring in like a feathered accusation. He lands on the windowsill, puffed and smug. You rush to him, gently untie the ribbon, and pause before opening the scroll. Because this part, is sacred. You study the seal. Green wax. Willow tree. You nearly drop the whole thing. Inside, her letter smells faintly of lavender and something fainter still, a trace of anticipation. You unfold it. Your hands are steadier than before. Maybe because this time, you're not wondering whether she'll reply. You're wondering what she'll dare to say. And when you finish reading, you don't smile, not yet. But you sit back, and for the first time in days you close your eyes. She wrote back. And that's enough, for now. You don't move for a long time after reading her letter. Not out of shock, not even out of hesitation, but because you're savoring the rare, unhurried silence of medieval affection successfully delivered. No swordplay, no lute serenades beneath stone balconies. Just you, a bird with a superiority complex, and a folded piece of parchment that smells like dried flowers and danger. The letter is a masterpiece of suggestion. You read it again, this time aloud in a whisper, mouthing each line like a monk might recite scripture he doesn't quite understand but desperately wants to believe. She mentions the moon again. Then a single line about a flower blooming out of season, followed by a curious reference to a brace of deer wandering too near the orchard. Depending on how metaphorically you want to read that, it's either a charming wildlife observation or the boldest invitation you've ever received. But before you can get too carried away imagining orchard trysts and metaphorical deer, you notice the bottom of the parchment. There's a postscript. Just one word. Careful. It's not signed. And somehow, that's what makes your heartbeat kick. You fold the letter precisely 7 times, as per superstition, and tuck it behind the loose brick in the scriptorium's east wall, your current repository for anything that would make the abbot's hairline retreat even faster. You glance toward Renault, who is preening in the glow of the nearby hearth like a feathered demigod. He's earned his smugness, but he's clearly in no rush to leave. You toss him a bit of oat crust as a tip. He accepts it with the disdain of someone who expected honey-glazed figs. Now you must reply. Again. But this time, you're not starting from blank parchment. You have her tone, her rhythm, her code. You know now that she reads between the lines, that her mind is quick and her pen even quicker. That makes things harder, and more thrilling. You sit down and begin composing. The deer may wander. You write. But the orchard is well guarded, especially when the stars turn their faces. You pause. You wanted to say, I miss you. But not in a way that might get you excommunicated or, worse, laughed at during banquet season. You try again. Even in frost, your voice lingers like a psalm in a sleeping chapel. That's better. Poetic. Almost too poetic. You add a line about restraint, just in case she thinks you're getting ideas above your station. I ask for nothing but the return of spring, and the sound of distant bells. Boom. Courtly love achieved. Historians still argue whether this sort of letter writing was sincere emotional expression or just a fashionable way to pass the time while waiting to be married off to someone with a good cabbage yield. But in this moment, it feels absolutely real. You seal the letter again, single red wax, crescent sigil. This time, no outer layers. No chaperone decoy. You're taking a risk. A bold one. Renaud isn't amused when you fasten the scroll. He flaps his wings, clearly unimpressed by your growing recklessness. You whisper, "Just one more trip. Then I'll send you back to the nice widow who feeds you raisins." It might be a lie. Renaud glares, but he flies. And so begins the next wait. Except, this time, things start to feel different. The next reply takes longer. A day longer. Then 2. Then 4. You begin to wonder, did someone intercept it? Did her uncle discover the ribbon-wrapped scroll and mistake it for French subterfuge? Did Renaud get distracted by breadcrumbs and retire early? Or did she change her mind? You go about your days, copying manuscripts, grinding pigments, watching the abbey cat chase flies with tragic confidence, but you're distracted. Every creak of a window feels like wings. Every bell chime sounds like a door opening. And still, no pigeon. Then, at dawn on the 7th day, you hear it. A rustle. A soft, ragged coo. And there he is. Renaud, bedraggled and noticeably less smug. You rush forward. Untie the scroll. This time, the seal is different. No wax. Just a tightly knotted ribbon. And inside, not words, but a single pressed flower. It's the out-of-season bloom she mentioned, tucked inside a fold of silk. No message. No explanation. But enough to keep you awake the rest of the morning, staring at it like it might bloom again just for you. You hold the flower like it might dissolve in your palm. It's small, delicate, faded at the edges, but unmistakable. A snowdrop, or something very like it. Not a rose, not a lily, not one of the showy blooms flaunted on the sleeves of romantic tapestries. This is quiet affection, subtle, out of season, possibly illegal depending on the garden regulations in her county. It says more than any scroll. Because sending a flower in place of words? That's the medieval version of shouting, "I trust you," across a crowded hall and pretending it was just a comment on the wine. You run your thumb over the petals. There's no note. No hint of where it was picked. No scent except faint silk and dust. But you know what it means. You just don't know why it came without a letter. It unnerves you a little. Because while medieval love is mostly about discretion, this silence feels calculated. Heavy. Not cold, but careful. Too careful. You don't write back immediately. Instead, you walk the perimeter of the abbey grounds, muttering to yourself and dodging questions from Brother Cedric, who asks if you're speaking tongues or rehearsing a sermon for your imaginary parish. You consider writing something light. A thank you? A small poem about flowers blooming from frost again. But it feels wrong, too eager. Instead, you return to your desk and write nothing. For the first time in weeks, your desk is empty of scrolls. No curling vellum. No hot wax. No ode sealed beneath ribbon. And you hate it. Historians still argue whether periods of silence in medieval correspondences reflected strategy, doubt, or the simple logistics of messenger mishaps. But to you, this feels personal. As if the flower was her way of saying, we've reached a point where anything else could be dangerous. So you wait again. This time, not for a reply, but for a sign. And then, it arrives. Not by pigeon. By servant. A scullery boy named Thomas, who smells of onions and damp wool, appears at the abbey gate with a folded bundle in his arms and a note pinned to his sleeve. He looks terrified. "I was told to say, it's just laundry," he mumbles. Brother Alric eyes the bundle with suspicion. "And the note? Also laundry." Ulrich isn't convinced, but laundry is beneath his dignity to investigate. He waves the boy in, and soon, the bundle is delivered to your hands. Inside, a square of embroidered linen. The thread is dark red, the border carefully stitched. In the center, a willow tree leans over a winding stream. You recognize the symbol, her sigil, the same as her green wax seal. And just below the tree, something new. 2 small birds. One perched. One in flight. And still, not a single written word. She's speaking in symbols now. Why? Because letters can be copied, intercepted, used against her. But thread? Needlework? That's just a pastime. A harmless act of leisure. Unless, of course, you know how to read it. The message is clear. Don't write. Not now. Wait. Watch. Trust. You sit back and feel the strangest mix of fear and elation. This isn't the blissful drift of early flirtation anymore. This is the shift, the threshold. The point in the story where it stops being a game and becomes something that could last. But also something that could be broken. You fold the linen square and press it to your chest for a moment before sliding it into your robe. Renaud flaps down beside you, scowling like a retired courier forced into active duty again. You pat his wing and whisper, "Not today!" He seems relieved. Because now, you're no longer writing to her. You're waiting for her. And in a world that demands permission for every glance and gate pass, that kind of waiting? It's an act of love in itself. You wake the next morning with the embroidery still folded in your sleeve, like a secret heartbeat against your ribs. No letter. No new message. No midnight pigeon tapping at your shutters with an attitude problem. Just the soft hush of monastic life beginning again, bells in the distance, sandals on stone, the clink of a bucket at the well. But you feel different. Quietly. Recruited. Like you've been enlisted into something delicate and unseen, a kind of romantic espionage where your greatest weapon is patience and your only battlefield is interpretation. You carry the cloth with you throughout the day, not openly, but tucked discreetly inside your robe pocket. Every now and then, your fingers brush the embroidery's edge, tracing the shape of the flying bird. Was it meant to be her? You? A warning? Or just the prettiest thread she had? Historians still puzzle over the meanings of such visual metaphors. Was embroidery a code, a confession, or simply an act of boredom in rooms too heavily draped for fresh air? Some argue noblewomen used needlework as both diary and defense, a way to say everything without ever picking up a pen. You believe that. Because today, you start noticing things. A pigeon loft has been emptied. 2 of the castle's riders pass the abbey gates, their livery oddly plain, no sigil, no crest. One of them glances at the abbey wall just a little too long. Brother Ulrich grumbles that they're tax agents. You're not so sure. Later, during afternoon devotions, Brother Edmund coughs in a very specific rhythm near your desk. You look up. He doesn't meet your eyes, but he does leave a folded parchment underneath your inkwell. You wait 10 minutes before opening it. It reads, "Garden wall. 3rd stone. Nightfall." No signature. Just damp ink and a tiny smudge that smells faintly of lilac soap. You know the soap. You've smelled it in her letters. So you wait. And at twilight, while the monks recite their psalms and the kitchen boils cabbage with the same enthusiasm it reserves for penance, you slip out the side door and walk toward the outer garden. It's quiet. Fog curls along the flagstones, making the rosemary bushes look like stooped sentries. You count the stones along the old wall, fingers trembling slightly. 1, 2, 3. You reach behind the 3rd stone and feel something cool and firm, a small wooden box. No lock. No hinge. You open it right there in the dark, the lid creaking like an old secret. Inside is a folded bit of parchment, smaller than usual, as if torn from the margin of something more official. You open it. A single sentence, written in her hand. "The hawthorn blooms early this year. Will you walk beside it?" You exhale. It's not a letter. Not truly. It's not a meeting request. Not Quite. It's a test. And maybe a promise. The hawthorn tree stands just outside the boundary of her estate, near the old stone path where peasants sometimes bring livestock to market. It's far enough to be unchaperoned, close enough to still be a place of chance encounter. You don't reply. You just nod to the box, place a single sprig of rosemary inside as acknowledgement, and return it to the hollow. When morning comes, you'll find a reason to be near the hawthorn. Maybe delivering a borrowed book to the steward. Maybe accidentally taking the wrong road on a prayer walk. It doesn't matter. Because now, the game has changed. You are no longer writing to her. You are about to see her. In a world where touching a wrist in public could end a family alliance, even the idea of meeting beneath a blooming hawthorn feels wildly reckless. And completely irresistible. Morning arrives dressed in mist and modesty. A soft gray light spills over the cloister stones, muffling sound and thought alike. You've rehearsed nothing, packed light, and worn your second-best robe, the one that says, pious and humble, but not about to meet a girl by a tree. You tell Brother Cedric you're off to return a borrowed psalter to the steward's clerk 2 villages over. He narrows his eyes like a man who suspects romantic blasphemy but can't prove it. You show him the book. Real, leather-bound, full of commentary on obscure saints who may or may not have existed. He lets you go. You take the longer route, the one that skirts the edge of the estate, past the field where oxen sometimes stare at you like they're in on something, past the crumbling wayside shrine where pigeons hold meetings in Latin, and finally down the worn path toward the hawthorn. It stands crooked near a bend in the road, gnarled and ancient, its branches touched with white blossoms too early for the season. She's already there. Or rather, she's near. You catch a glimpse of her cloak first, a flash of deep green against a backdrop of white blooms. She's pretending to inspect the tree bark. You're pretending not to hold your breath. There is no smile. Of course not. Smiling in public could be seen from a castle window, misinterpreted by a passing knight, or, worst of all, reported to her aunt. Instead, she glances at you sideways and speaks to the tree. They say it's unlucky when hawthorn blooms before the feast of St. Agnes. You nod solemnly. They also say rosemary only thrives where women rule the kitchen. You reply, equally grave. She doesn't laugh. But she does look at you now, properly. Her eyes hold yours, steady as ink on a vow. I wasn't sure you'd come, she says, barely above the breeze. You shrug. I wasn't sure you'd ask. There's silence, but it's warm. Like standing near a hearth in a stranger's home. She reaches into her sleeve and withdraws something small, folded parchment sealed with a thread of silver. I can't write again. Not for a while, she murmurs. It's too noticed. You take it, tucking it into your robe without unfolding it. Not here. Not yet. Record. It's how you'll keep the thing alive while silence is demanded and meetings must be brief, hidden between hedgerows and hymns. You sit at your desk again, but this time there's no hesitation. The words come easily, like water from a deep well finally loosened by the right touch. I returned to the hawthorn, you begin, and found no flowers left. The wind had taken them, but the scent remained. You're learning to say everything and nothing in the same breath. It's maddening and kind of thrilling. You sign it only with your sigil, crescent moon and rosemary. You do not seal it. You do not send it. Not yet. Because something's shifting. There's unease in the abbey. Subtle, like a draft that wasn't there before. Conversations hush when you walk past. Brother Alric mutters more than usual. And yesterday, someone rifled through the Pigeon loft. You check on Renaud. His feathers are ruffled, literally and emotionally. He's pacing along the beam, refusing food and glaring at the sky like it owes him money. You know the look. You've worn it yourself. Historians still argue whether pigeon messengers were truly secure or just the best option in a world without functioning doorbells. But anyone paying attention knows this much. If the birds start acting nervous, so should you. You decide to wait. 2 more days. You spend the time copying theological texts so dry they practically scratch your eyes. the kind that list obscure heresies and the penalties for chewing too loudly during Lent. Every now and then, you slip in a line of your own, hidden between the Latin. Just enough to keep your mind from turning to soup. Then, on the third morning, it arrives. But not by bird. By boot. A courier, real, official, and coated in the dust of 20 miles, arrives with a scroll bearing the wax seal of House Avellini. The red wax is marred, slightly cracked. The symbol is faint, but you recognize the willow. You're summoned. Not by her, but by her aunt, Lady Marjorie. Your heart stops somewhere around your collarbone and tries to tunnel upward. You read the message 3 times, but it doesn't change. You are requested for consultation regarding a matter of literary accuracy. Kindly bring your translations of Ovid. Discretion is expected. Hospitality will be extended. You sit back in your chair stunned. She knows. She must. Or suspects. Or worse, someone has shown her one of the letters. You look at Renaud. He is asleep. Completely unbothered. You envy him. You pack your things slowly, 3 scrolls, your cleanest robe, and a small pouch containing rosemary, thyme, and the pressed snowdrop, now dry and fragile as parchment itself. And as you leave the abbey gates under a grey, humming sky, you think, this is either the end, or something much stranger is about to begin. The road to her estate winds like a sentence you're too nervous to finish. You travel on foot, partly to preserve the fiction of humility, partly because you need time, long, thoughtful time, to imagine every possible outcome of this sudden consultation. By mile 3, you've convinced yourself the aunt simply wants help translating a few saucy Latin passages that got her embroidery guild into trouble. By mile 6, you're halfway through planning your defense. Yes, I wrote those metaphors, but you must understand, hawthorns have historically represented chastity. By mile 9, you've resigned yourself to exile, public humiliation, or being reassigned to the monastery cellar with nothing but pickled beets and a copy of Leviticus. The estate comes into view just as the sun breaks the clouds. Tall stone walls softened by ivy, chimneys sighing gentle smoke, and pennants barely stirring in the wind. You're escorted through the side gate, not the front, and led through a narrow passage that smells of lavender and boiled linen. Lady Marjorie is waiting in the tapestry room. That's not good. Rooms with tapestries are never for casual conversations. She stands by the window, posture ramrod straight, hands clasped in front of her like she's contemplating your fate in iambic pentameter. She does not smile. Brother, she says, though you're not one, not technically. Thank you for coming. You bow. Deep. Respectful. Briefly wonder if it would be overdoing it to compliment the stitching on the tapestry behind her. It depicts a swan attacking a knight. She gestures to a chair. You've come recommended as a translator. This is unexpected. Yes, my lady. I've worked with Ovid, Seneca, and a rather dog-eared copy of Catullus. She does not blink. I've received a letter from my niece, she says. It contains references. Flowers. Birds. Metaphors so layered I suspect she's either smitten or feverish. Your throat dries instantly. Marjorie lifts the letter. Not one of yours. One of hers. The snowdrop was not the only thing Avellini sent recently. Tell me, she continues, do you believe courtly love is real? Or simply a distraction cultivated by idle nobles with access to too much vellum? Historians still debate that one too. Whether the elaborate rituals of medieval romance were genuine expressions of affection, or performative games meant to keep young people from torching the social order with unsanctioned elopements. I believe. You say slowly. It's real when 2 people risk their reputations just to speak in flowers. Marjorie narrows her eyes. That sounds rehearsed. It is, you admit. But sincerely so. She sets the letter down, steeples her fingers. I should be furious. She murmurs. You nod. I should write your abbot. Or hers. Another nod. But I've read the letters, she says at last, eyes flicking to a small box beside the tapestries. The one she didn't hide well. And I must admit, I haven't seen penmanship that earnest in 20 years. You dare not speak. I won't tell you I approve, she says. But, she turns to the window. But I am old. And tired. And I have no wish to arrange another marriage between cousins whose greatest bond is the mutual hatred of roast eel. You blink. So I'll say this once, if you're going to write to her again, do it better. Hide it better. And for heaven's sake, learn to spell sincerity. You flush. She hands you a small pouch. Take this, she says. From her. I didn't open it. You bow again, grateful and bewildered. As you're escorted out, you finally peek into the pouch. Inside is a tiny square of embroidery. The two birds again. But this time, they're facing each other. And below them, in small threadwork script, keep writing. You clutch the fabric and smile, fully this time. You survived Lady Marjorie. You have her unspoken, not approval, but perhaps her wary tolerance. And best of all, you have a reason to write again. Back at the Abbey, your return is met with precisely the amount of suspicion one might expect when a known parchment hoarder disappears for a day and returns with the kind of serene expression usually reserved for martyrs and men who've just held hands under a hawthorn tree. Brother Edmund raises an eyebrow. Brother Cedric sniffs the air like he can detect sin by scent alone. Renaud ignores you entirely, because you forgot to bring back oat crusts and he's petty like that. You slip into your cell, draw the curtain, and unfold the embroidered square for the 20th time. The two birds now face one another. That tiny shift, beak to beak, wings slightly lifted, changes everything. It's not a reply. It's a permission. And in a world where spoken affection could trigger political scandal, a stitched glance is as close to a vow as you might ever get. You reach for fresh parchment. But before ink touches vellum, you hesitate. Because now, your letters have to carry more than metaphor. They have to do something. If you're to write her again, it must be worthy, not of the romance, but of the risk. You begin slow. If two birds once flew in the same direction by accident, but met again under a flowering tree, is it still called chance? Or do even the winds listen sometimes? You pause. Good. Obscure. Lightly poetic. Completely deniable in a court of law or ecclesiastical inquiry. You go on. The tapestry changes, my lady. Not in the weaving, but in the way I look at the threads. You're not even sure what that means, but you're fairly certain she will. You keep riding into the night. You talk of the road. Of the scent of hawthorn on your sleeves. Of how Renaud now paces the sill at sunset, looking bored but also, maybe, hopeful. You tuck in a reference to a local priest's sermon about longing being a form of devotion, which is either very appropriate or very heretical. You hope for the former. Then, for the first time, you dare to end the letter with something new. Until next spring. Or sooner, if the frost relents. No seal this time. Instead, you do something risky. You fold the letter into a small square and stitch it shut with red thread, just one line, knotted delicately at the corner. Historians note that in the later Middle Ages, some lovers, especially those barred from using wax due to surveillance, hid their letters in stitched cloth, unsealable without being cut. It wasn't just security. It was symbolism. You may open this, but only if you're willing to break something tender. You hide the stitched letter behind the scriptorium's firewood stack. Not elegant, but Renaud knows the spot. Or at least you think he does. You bribe him with a dried fig just in case. The next day, he's gone again, scroll tied, wing confident, ego enormous. You spend the afternoon pretending to care deeply about a marginal debate on whether St. Cuthbert's walking stick was made of ash or hawthorn. The irony doesn't escape you. And then, one evening later, Renaud returns. This time, his arrival is quiet. No coup. No fanfare. Just the sound of wind brushing his wings as he drops something soft into your lap and lands on the window beam with a self-satisfied grunt. You look down. It's a glove. Green. Embroidered at the cuff. Yours? No. Hers. And tucked inside, barely visible, is a sliver of parchment. Not stitched. Not sealed. Just folded. You unfold it with trembling fingers. I will be at the chapel garden during the saints' procession. Wear this if you walk near. That's all. No signature. No metaphor. No poetry. Just an invitation. And a glove that still smells faintly of thyme and rosewater and, somehow, possibility. You press the glove to your chest and look out at Renaud, who is now preening like a knight who's won a tournament by standing still. Good work, you whisper. He turns away. You allow yourself one moment, just one, of indulgent, wild, impossible hope. Because now, it's not just words. It's her. It's you. And it's a garden. The chapel garden sits tucked behind the sanctuary walls, hidden by hedges that haven't been properly trimmed since the last bishop died mid-prayer, and no one had the heart to maintain his favorite roses. It's not technically private, but it's so ignored that even the bees seem surprised when someone enters. Statues of forgotten saints line the gravel path, most of them worn smooth from centuries of wind and mildly judgmental rain. The saints' procession will pass nearby, as it does every year, with all the solemnity of a minor miracle being reenacted by men in itchy robes and teenagers ringing cracked bells out of sync. Most of the abbey will be in the central courtyard, eyes on the spectacle. Which means, for a brief, sweet hour, the garden will be yours. You arrive first, wearing her glove tucked in your belt where a dagger might go. It's symbolic, but also just deeply impractical as it keeps slipping and making you look like you're trying to smuggle a lettuce leaf. Still you wait. There's birdsong. Then silence. Then footsteps. You don't turn. But you feel her before you see her, like a change in air pressure, or the moment before a candle goes out. She moves beside you without a word. You glance at her. She wears no veil. That alone feels revolutionary. Her hair is pinned simply, as if she dressed quickly, or didn't care what the saints thought. You wonder if her aunt knows. You wonder if her aunt allowed this. You don't ask. You both face the garden, hands clasped politely in front of you like two patrons admiring basil. So, she says, you stitched a letter shut. You nod. Wax felt obvious. She lets the silence stretch. I liked it. Your breath catches, but you don't let it show. Not here. Not now. The glove was unexpected, you reply. I thought perhaps you'd challenge me to a duel. I might still, she murmurs. Depending how today goes. And then, blessedly, she laughs. Not loudly. Not foolishly. Just enough for the garden to lean in closer. You know, she says after a moment, my cousin is insisting I marry a man with 4 vineyards and no chin. Strong profile is overrated. And the vineyards? Also overrated. She smirks. He writes poetry. That should be illegal. Bad poetry, she clarifies. You place a hand, carefully, cautiously, on the edge of the low stone wall between you. Not close enough to touch her. Just close enough to be possible. There's going to be a gathering, she says, voice low. The steward's daughter is marrying a spice merchant. There'll be dancing. Music. Linen napkins. You nod. I could be there, you say. Accidentally? You'll need a reason. I've accidentally attended stranger things. She looks at you, and for a moment the whole abbey falls away. The bells, the prayers, the duties, the miles of parchment and layered wax seals. It's just her. In this garden. Standing beneath a fig tree that has never borne fruit but always tries. I want to keep this, she says softly. Whatever it is. You nod. I do too. A bell rings in the distance. The procession is turning toward the chapel. You have minutes, maybe less. She turns to go, but pauses. I left something, she says, behind the saint with the broken hand. You wait until she's gone, until the last swish of her cloak has disappeared down the corridor. Then you rush to the statue of Saint Bartholomew, whose missing fingers have never looked more helpful. There, Nestled between the mossy stone and a tuft of lavender is a scroll. You open it. No words. Just a sketch. 2 birds. Again. But this time, side by side. Wings brushing. And below them, drawn so lightly you almost miss it, is a new element. A single key. You sit with the drawing in your lap, half bent behind the statue of St. Bartholomew like some half-penitent garden thief, heart thumping with the quiet thunder of recognition. A key. Not an actual one. There's no metal, no weight, just a drawing. But in medieval symbolism, that's more than enough. Keys meant access. Trust. Sometimes ownership. Sometimes invitation. And often, when drawn beside birds, no less, they hinted at something more dangerous than entry. They hinted at intimacy. You stare at the parchment as though it might change if you squint harder. The birds are there. Again, her recurring emblem, always more expressive than anything your words could touch. This time, they aren't facing each other or flying apart. They're perched on either side of the key, wings slightly lifted, as though about to take flight, but not yet. Still. Stillness is rare in your life. Everything usually shifts. Bleeds. Leaks ink. But this moment, this tiny sketch behind a saint with poor hand posture, holds perfectly still. You fold it and slip it into the lining of your robe, over your heart. Later that evening, back in your cell, you try to write, but nothing comes. Not because you don't have words, but because this sketch has stolen their job. Instead, you begin a list. Not a poem. Not a letter. Just a list of things you now know. Her glove fits awkwardly in your belt but perfectly in your palm. She laughs softly when she's not supposed to. Her embroidery always says more than her mouth does. She trusts you, maybe more than she should. You'd follow that trust through fire. Or, at the very least, through a very awkward dinner party. You sleep with the parchment under your pillow, which does not improve your dreams. They mostly involve birds with keys for feet, but it does steady your breathing. The following morning, Renaud is gone. You didn't send him. He just leaves sometimes, on his own errands. He has secrets of his own, you suspect. Possibly a lady pigeon somewhere with a fondness for shiny seeds and emotionally unavailable couriers. You spend the day in the scriptorium, eyes glazing over a poorly illustrated bestiary entry on hedgehogs as wine thieves. There's no word from her. But you don't panic. Because now your connection doesn't depend on scrolls or wax or pigeons. It lives, in a drawing, a glove, a look. And then, on the second night, there's a knock at your cell door. You freeze. No one knocks here. Monks cough. Stewards bark. Birds peck. But this is a knock, soft, deliberate, polite. You open the door. A servant girl you've never seen before stands there with a bundle in her arms. "This is for you," she says quickly. "From Lady Marjorie." "Well, indirectly." You open it. It's a key. A real one. Iron. Worn smooth. And attached to it by a thin red ribbon is a note. "North Library Tower. Second floor. Candle mark after Compline. Bring nothing. Say nothing. And for heaven's sake, wear shoes." There's no signature. But it doesn't need one. The handwriting isn't hers. It's Marjorie's. And that, somehow, is even more astonishing. You stare at the key. It's heavy in your palm. Heavier than a drawing. Heavier than a flower or a glove or a stitched square. This key unlocks something. A door? A room? A conversation? A future? You don't know. But you'll go. Because trust, once given, has its own gravity. And love, once real, becomes a kind of quiet obligation. And so, just after Compline, when the abbey slips into incense and snores, you put on your softest shoes, cloak your shoulders, and head toward the library tower with the kind of calm that only exists in people who are terrified but too curious to stop. The lock clicks open on the first try. And the candle waiting inside burns steady. The door swings open with a sound like an old breath, soft, resigned, full of dust and permission. You step into the tower room and pause. It's warmer than you expected. not in temperature but in tone. The air smells faintly of beeswax, dried rosemary, and old vellum. Shelves line the walls, cluttered not with books, but with things too personal to be archived, half-melted candles, sealed letters never sent, pressed flowers long since faded to gray. A single candle flickers at the far end of the room, set beside a modest writing desk. There's only one chair, but 2 cups of wine. You hear the door click shut behind you. She's there, standing near the window, hood lowered, gaze fixed outward toward the dark garden below. Her posture is still, but not stiff. She doesn't turn when you enter. For a moment you just look. Not at her hair, which is loosely braided and pinned with a silver comb you've only ever seen sketched. Not at her hands, which rest gently on the windowsill as though the stones themselves need calming. But at the space between you. Close. Unbelievably so. You clear your throat softly. She turns. And smiles. Not the subtle, practiced curl of a courtly lady. Not the serene expression she wears in tapestries or chapel pews. A real smile. Small. Uneven. Warm. You forget how to breathe for a moment. I wasn't sure you'd come, she says. That's twice she's said it. And both times you were absolutely certain you would. I told myself I wouldn't. You admit. She laughs. I told myself I'd send someone else. With a scroll. And instructions. And yet here we are. She nods. You move toward the table. The wine is modest, likely monastery stock, which means it tastes somewhere between smoke and vinegar. But right now, it might as well be ambrosia. She sits on the windowsill. You take the chair. Neither of you touches the cups. This isn't about wine. It's about saying the things you couldn't write. The glove. You begin. I nearly sent 2. She interrupts. But that felt presumptuous. You smile. It felt clear. Too clear? No. Silence again. But not uncomfortable. Just thick with all the words you've both been holding back. She reaches into the folds of her cloak and pulls out something small, wrapped in embroidered cloth. She places it on the table between you. You open it slowly. Inside is the first letter you ever sent her. The ink has faded slightly. The wax is cracked. But it's still intact. Still folded the same way. You kept it, you whisper. I kept all of them, she says. Even the one where you accidentally rhymed fate with vegetate. You groan. I panicked. I noticed. She leans forward now, eyes studying yours like she's trying to decide whether to speak or wait forever. Then, my cousin is leaving. Back to Burgundy. With his vineyards and his opinions about women's ankles. You blink. That's good? That's convenient. She fidgets with the edge of the cloth. My aunt said nothing directly, but she let me keep the key. And the room? She smiles faintly. No one reads in here. Not really. They just say they do. You glance at the shelves. Indeed, most of the books are fake, painted spines, theatrical flourishes. A room designed to look scholarly from a distance. But close up? It's a hiding place. And possibly, just possibly, a beginning. I don't know what this is, she says finally. But I know I want to keep it. You nod. You don't reach for her hand. Not yet. But you do say what you haven't dared until now. I love you. She doesn't flinch. Doesn't laugh. Just exhales, long and slow, like something inside her has been waiting to be allowed out. And then, quietly, but without a trace of hesitation, she replies. I know. Outside, the wind brushes the tower wall like the wings of a giant bird. And for the first time in your life, you feel utterly safe inside a secret. The room doesn't change after the words are said. The candle doesn't flare. The wind doesn't still. No divine choir bursts through the plaster with a celestial chorus of sanctioned affection. But you change. Something inside you, tight and coiled and forever worried, relaxes. Not entirely. But enough to let breath settle in your chest like it belongs there. She sits across from you, hands folded loosely now, wine untouched. You wonder if she can feel it too, that strange, suspended calm that happens right after a storm decides not to happen after all. I thought saying it would be harder. You murmur. She tilts her head. I thought hearing it would be harder. Silence again. But this time, it wraps around you like a warm shawl, woven from every letter, every glance, every wax-sealed maybe. You look toward the shelves, and finally, curiosity wins. Can I ask? You say, gesturing toward the faux books. Why keep a room like this? She rises, crossing the stone floor with the ease of someone who's wandered here before. She runs her finger along a shelf until she finds a tiny hook behind the spine of the Life of Saint Odelia. With a click, one of the panels swings open. Behind it, real books. Poems. Letters. Hand-bound scrolls with ink-smudged margins and corner notes. Some are faded, others marked with ribbons. One is sealed with wax the same shade as the wax you used. These, she says, voice soft, are my real education. You step closer. Some of the authors are names you know, but others, many, are not. I copy them, she says. Hide them here. Some are from women whose names didn't survive. Others were never meant to be remembered. You pull one scroll from its shelf and unroll it an inch. The handwriting is shaky, but vibrant. The words are in Latin, but not the kind the monks teach. This is passionate. Subversive. Alive. You're building a library, you whisper. She nods. Of what we're not supposed to say. Historians often overlook these spaces, unofficial archives tucked in tower rooms, stitched into linings, scrawled into the margins of hymnals. But they existed. They endured. Because even in the most tightly controlled worlds, someone is always writing anyway. Why show me this? You ask. Because, she says, stepping beside you. You already wrote your way into it. The key, her drawing of it, makes sense now. It's not just access to a room. It's access to this. To her. Not just the woman who sends gloves and flowers, but the one who hides forbidden texts between saints' lives and tucks fire into candlelight. You sit beside her on the window ledge, and together you read the next scroll aloud, a poem, unsigned, about longing beneath the almond tree. The lines rhyme unevenly. There's a part about chickens. It's perfect. Outside, the night deepens. Somewhere in the abbey, bells chime softly for the final prayer. No one comes to find you. No one dares. Because in this room, at this hour, two people have stepped entirely outside. The script. There's no wax to melt. No pigeon to guide. No chaperone with sharp questions. Just ink. Just words. Just the space between two sentences where something real lives. You look over at her and say, "This is dangerous." She nods. So is staying silent. And then, for the first time, you touch her hand. Not in defiance. Not in desire. But as punctuation. Because sometimes, the truest things are not said in the letter, but in the line that follows. The touch lasts barely longer than a heartbeat. But it echoes. You both return your hands to your laps as if nothing has changed, though everything has. The room doesn't lean in. The candle doesn't flicker in approval. But something unspoken passes between you, fragile and anchoring at once. You continue reading, side by side, taking turns with the scrolls. Some are lyrical and reverent, others clumsy and bold. A few are barely readable, written in hands that shake and cross out as much as they confess. These are my favorites, she says, holding one up. The flawed ones. You raise an eyebrow. They're honest, she adds. They try without knowing how. That stirs something in you. Because your first letter, the one she still keeps, was mostly trying. Trying to sound courtly, poetic, important. But it was honest, too. A man fumbling for elegance with ink-stained fingers and a pigeon who hated him. You sit there a long while, reading, sharing, breathing. At one point, she rests her head gently on your shoulder. Just enough that you stop reading mid-line. But she says nothing. So neither do you. Historians rarely write about moments like this. They chronicle the wars, the treaties, the edicts, the drama. Not the pause in a quiet tower when two people rest against each other, knowing that outside these walls, the world would demand permission for a glance. Eventually, the candle gutters. She sighs, pulling away, not coldly, but with that kind of gentle practicality that governs every woman raised in proximity to consequences. "It's late," she murmurs. You nod, though time has collapsed into something soft and borderless. "I'll see you again?" you ask. She stands, brushing her cloak into place. "Of course. But not like this. Not soon." You frown, already reaching for the sense of closeness slipping through your fingers. "I'll send something," she says, reading the question in your silence. "Not a letter. But something." You want to ask what? But part of you already knows. She moves to the door and pauses, hand on the latch. "You did bring the glove, didn't you?" You nod and hold it up. "Good," she says, smiling. "Keep it. It's yours now." Then she slips out, soundless. You stay a little longer, letting the silence settle into you like cool water. You place the scroll you were reading back onto the shelf, gently smoothing its edge. And before you go, you trace your initials, just faintly, into the wood behind it. A record that you were here. That you read. That you loved. Back in your cell, the glove rests on your desk. Renaud is asleep on your windowsill, dreaming, you suspect, of dramatic air rescues and superior breadcrumbs. You lie on your cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking about libraries hidden in towers, poems written in fear, and how often the truest sentences don't end with periods, but ellipses. You don't write that night. You wait. Because the next move isn't yours. And you trust her enough to know, when it comes, it will arrive without fanfare. Maybe a flower. Maybe a thread. Or maybe, just maybe, a key you've never seen before. 4 days pass. Not quietly, but expectantly. You go through your monastic duties like a man under a vow of hope. You copy texts, stir soup, sweep corridors, and answer questions with the kind of polite half-smile that drives Brother Cedric to mutter about young scribes and their mysterious inner peace. But the truth is you're waiting. Not impatiently. Not anxiously. Just openly. Because she said she'd send something, not a letter. Not words. Something. And if you've learned anything about her by now, it's this: she does not bluff. It's on the morning of the 5th day, during a completely ordinary task, restringing the binding on a worn psalter, that you find it. You've set the psalter aside, pages fanned open, when your hand brushes against a gap between folios. You pause. Tucked there, thin as breath, is a square of linen. Embroidered. You unfold it carefully. It's not a glove. Not a flower. But a map. A small one. Stylized. Not geographical, but symbolic. Threaded in silver and green, it shows a walled garden. A single tree stitched in the center, clearly the hawthorn. A crescent moon above. A small bench. And stitched beneath, in looping red thread, St. Agatha's Vigil. After moonrise. 1 chaperone. 2 hearts. You stare at it. This isn't a letter. It's an invitation. And permission. St. Agatha's Vigil is a small feast day, barely celebrated in the abbey. There will be a short liturgy, then most will retire early. A perfect time for an arranged coincidence. You don't rush your preparations. You iron your robe. You clean your boots. You dust off your best ribbon, the one no one else notices, but she will. And just before you leave, you slip the glove into your belt once more. The road to the garden feels familiar now, as if your feet have memorized the gravel and your breath understands the rhythm of approaching joy. The garden is quiet. Moonlight drips through the hedges like spilled cream, soft and glowing. The hawthorn shivers in a passing breeze. The bench waits. She arrives moments later. Not cloaked this time. Not veiled. Just herself. Hair loose. Eyes bright. A single braid tied with a green ribbon. And beside her, true to the note, is her chaperone, Celeste, who sits down by the fountain with a book so large it might be shielding a flask of wine. You and Avellini take the bench. You say nothing at first. Just sit. Shoulders aligned. Knees respectfully apart. Hands folded in your laps like two strangers learning how not to tremble. She breaks the silence. I was worried the linen would get lost. It didn't. I almost stitched a poem, but I thought it would sound too much like goodbye. You turn to her. It's not goodbye. No. You both fall silent again, but this time, it's not out of uncertainty. It's because the moment doesn't need filling. The moon climbs higher. From the fountain, Celeste coughs once, then deliberately turns her back. And Avellini takes your hand. Openly. No sleeve brushing. No fingers grazing in passing. Just her hand in yours. You both look at it, surprised by how natural it feels. Her thumb brushes yours once. Then again. I think, she whispers, that I could do this. For a long time. You look up. With me? She nods. If you'll keep writing. You squeeze her hand gently. I'll write until I run out of metaphors. She laughs softly. That's not possible. And maybe it isn't. Because some stories don't need endings. Just quiet places to pause and catch your breath. And some love letters? They begin the moment the writing stops. You don't tell anyone about the bench. Not because it's secret, but because it's sacred. After that night, you and Avellini continue to meet there. Not often. Not carelessly. Only when the moon is high enough and Celeste has a book large enough to plausibly hide a small feast behind. The letters don't stop. But they change. They grow shorter. Because you're saying more in person now, beneath hedges, behind cloisters, between moments of studied detachment in the chapel aisle. One letter is only a line. You spoke to me today with your eyes. Another is just a pressed fern leaf wrapped in twine. And her reply? A page torn from a sermon, with a single sentence underlined. He who listens without fear hears the heart. It's not quite a courtship, not in the traditional sense. There are no declarations at feasts, no planned engagements, no drunken cousins stumbling into love ballads under her window. Just a slow unfolding of trust and timing. And fabric. So much fabric. Because with every note, she sends you a new embroidered square, stitched with symbols only you understand. You keep them in a small wooden box beneath your cot. It smells of ink and rosemary. A patchwork of feeling disguised as linen. You wonder sometimes what history will remember. Not your names. Those rarely survive unless you inherit land or start a war. But maybe the things will survive. The stitched birds. The glove. The scent of time pressed into parchment. Historians still argue whether most medieval romances ever progressed beyond poetry and longing. Whether these couplings were real or just spiritual exercises in frustration. But you know this one is real. Because it's not built on spectacle. It's built on return. And return is what defines love in a world that tries to scatter it. One evening, you find another scroll tucked behind the Saint Odelia statue. This time, the seal is violet wax. Unusual. You break it carefully. There is talk of movement. Of my aunt retiring to her sister's estate. She wants me to go with her. I told her I would consider it. But only if I could take the tower books. And the key. You read the letter 3 times before sitting down. Then you light a candle, pick up your quill, and write the most difficult sentence of your life. If you must go, I will wait. If you can stay, I will stay too. You don't seal it with wax. You stitch it shut, just like before. Then send Renaud. It takes 2 days for her reply to come back, delivered not by bird, but by Celeste, under the guise of returning a lost psalter. Inside the psalter, a single square of fabric, stitched with gold thread. Not a bird this time. Not a tree. A nest. And 2 tiny eggs inside. You run your thumb over the threadwork, blinking hard. It's not confirmation. Not yet. But it's hope. The softest, most honest kind. The kind that sits in your chest and builds a home of its own. You look out the window. Renaud is there, eyeing you as if to say, "Well, where to next?" You smile. Because you don't know. Not yet. But you know this. Wherever she goes, whatever she chooses, you will not be left behind. Not in spirit. Not in story. Not in the quiet rooms where parchment waits to be written on again. By now, the Abbey has grown used to your moods. They say nothing when you hum quietly over your parchment. They say nothing when you linger too long by the pigeon loft or, accidentally, take the garden route 3 times a day. Even Brother Cedric, once the Grand Inquisitor of eyebrow lifting, now simply mutters, "Love again?" and walks away whenever he sees you smiling into a folded cloth. You've become, quietly, unofficially, the monastery's most harmless heretic, a man devoted not to doctrine, but to devotion. And she? She has not left. Yet. Avellini still walks the garden paths, still leaves embroidered symbols in the hollow behind Saint Odilia. But her letters have grown less frequent, more direct. Each one a little closer to a choice. The latest arrives wrapped around a spool of green thread, sealed with a pressed violet. "I cannot stay like this forever. I'm ready to choose. But I must know, if I stayed, truly stayed, what would life with you look like?" You sit with the question all evening. Because it's not a poetic one. It's not metaphor. It's logistics. And logistics have never been your strong suit. So you write carefully. Not a letter, but a list. You leave out the grand flourishes. No soaring metaphors or veiled Hawthorne references. Just truth, in its quietest form. A small house. A garden. A desk for you, and a bench for me. One candle shared. Letters when we're apart, even for an hour. Pigeons optional. A key to something that does not need hiding. A vow made not before a crowd, but before a window. A life where the door is never locked when you return. You stitch the list into cloth. No ink. Just thread. You place it in the usual hollow. No seal. And wait. 2 nights later, Celeste appears. This time, she doesn't speak. She hands you a parcel. Wrapped in wool. Heavy. You unwrap it slowly. Inside. A key. Real. Iron. Not drawn. Not symbolic. Her key. To the tower. Tied around the shaft is a single thread of gold. And a scrap of parchment. It's yours now, too. You sit for a long time after that, turning the key in your hand. It smells faintly of rosemary and candle smoke and iron warmed by palms. It feels like an answer. It feels like yes. The next morning you wake early, before the bells, before the world remembers its rules. You dress simply. No robe. No ribbon. Just you. And the key. You walk the long path to the estate, feeling the dawn spread over your shoulders like a blessing. Renaud swoops once overhead, then peels away, giving you this one moment unaccompanied. The garden gate is already open. The tower door stands ajar. Inside, the candle is lit. She's waiting. No veil. No embroidery. No symbols. Just her. And you? She doesn't ask for a speech. She doesn't need one. Instead, she steps forward, and for the first time in this entire quiet symphony of glances and glyphs, she kisses you. Lightly. Deliberately. Once. And then again. Like punctuation. Like something that doesn't end, but begins. You stay in the tower all morning, though either of you speaks of time. The sun rises behind the leaded windows, casting gold against the stone like a silent choir giving its blessing. There's no plan. No grand unveiling of next steps. Only quiet tasks. She tidies the shelf where the scrolls once lived. You relight the candle that's begun to gutter. She hands you a second cup of tea. You drink it without asking where it came from. Everything feels ordinary, and yet entirely holy. When she looks at you now, it's not with caution, not with code. It's with the soft, steady gaze of someone who's decided. Not by force. Not from fear. But because the decision finally felt safe. Later, as you rest side by side on the low stone bench near the window, she speaks. My aunt's leaving within the week. You nod. You'd guessed. She's offered me the option to join her. New estate. New life. More embroidery. Fewer letters. You wait. She doesn't know I've said no. Not yet. She thinks I'm still weighing things. A beat. And I am. Just not in the way she thinks. You turn to her. What do you need? She exhales. I need to stay. But not as a secret. Not behind statues and stitched maps. I want a life that doesn't require pigeons to feel real. That lands hard. Because you've never wanted anything more. But to have that, to build a life of open doors and shared mornings, you'll need more than thread and wax. You'll need permission. Not from her aunt, but from the world she belongs to. The world that still sees you as a scribe with ink-stained hands and no inheritance, no banner, no title. So you say the only thing you can. Let me speak to the bishop. Her eyes widen. That's bold. Terrifying, you admit. But so is living like a footnote. Historians still debate how often such appeals worked. How many quiet lovers managed to turn whispers into witness, embroidery into household. The records are thin. The outcomes, uncertain. But this one? You want to try. You stand. She follows. At the threshold, she places something in your palm. A small stone. Smooth. Flat. Painted with a red mark, her sigil, the willow. You look up, questioning. For when you speak to him, she says. So you don't feel alone. You tuck it into your sleeve. It's not armor, but it's enough. That afternoon, you walk the long road to the bishop's residence. Not the great hall, not the cloister. Just the solar, where he meets with scribes and stewards and, occasionally, troublemakers with nervous smiles. You knock. He opens the door himself. Ah, he says. The pigeon poet. You nod once. May I speak plainly, Your Grace? He gestures to the seat beside the fire. Only if you mean every word. So you do. You tell him everything, not the scandalous version, not the blushing, stammering half-truth. The real story? Of letters written in moonlight. Of gloves and gardens. Of a tower full of unwritten histories and a woman brave enough to keep them. He listens. Longer than you expect. And when you finish, there's a pause. Then, do you love her? Yes. Would you leave the abbey for her? You hesitate. Then nod. I would. But I'd rather stay, and build something new. Another pause. Then he leans forward, steeples his fingers, and says, Bring me her writing. The best of it. And yours. Let me see what this love has built. If it speaks truth, then let it be known. Your breath catches. Permission? Not yet. But a path. You leave the bishop's quarters with the stones still warm in your sleeve. And a future beginning to unfold, not whispered, not smuggled, not hidden in folds of silk. But real. Out loud. And waiting to be written. You return to the tower that evening, heart racing in a quiet, purposeful way, not fear, exactly. More like standing at the edge of a page you've never dared to turn. Avellini is already there, candle lit, sleeves rolled, a half-stitched bird resting on her lap. She looks up, sees your expression, and sets her embroidery aside. You don't sit. You reach into your robe and pull out the stone. He said yes? You shake your head. He said show me. That's enough. She doesn't smile. She grins. Like someone who just heard thunder but already smells the rain. You begin that night. You bring scrolls from your cell, your oldest letters, fragments of poetry you never sent. She opens the hidden shelves, pulling down pieces she's guarded for years. Love letters, laments, resistance disguised as reverence. A library of women's voices, yours among them now. By moonlight, the two of you sort through the words. You choose 5. She chooses 5. Each one stitched with truth, tender, bold, clumsy, true. You place them in a vellum folder, the kind usually reserved for land grants or papal blessings. You tie it shut with green ribbon. She presses a sprig of rosemary inside. In the morning you walk together, openly. No cloaks. No shadows. Celeste watches you go from the garden gate, eyes narrowed in what might be pride, might be worry. She holds another book, absurdly large. You leave the folder with the bishop's clerk. No grand announcement. Just a name, a nod, and the bundle of every word you've ever whispered in secret now made ready to speak aloud. Then you wait. 3 days. 3 full days of silence and glances and breath held like relics. And on the 4th, a bell rings. Not the usual bell. The library bell. Summoning scribes. Only scribes. You go. He's waiting. Not behind a desk, but beside the fire. The folder is open. Pages spread. He looks up. You wrote this? Yes. All of it? Not the birds, you say. Those are hers. He picks up a square of embroidery, the one with the willow and the nest. Then, this is not an appeal. You brace. This is a testimony. You blink. He continues. If I were to ask the Abbey Council to approve your release, your union, what would you offer in return? You hesitate. Then answer. We'd teach. His eyebrows rise. There are others, you say. Young scribes. Young women. Who write. Who stitch. Who dream in quiet. Let us show them how to make it louder. He's silent a long time. Then nods. I will speak for you. You don't breathe until you're halfway back to the tower. Avellini sees your face and knows instantly. She laughs, really laughs, head thrown back, joy unmeasured. And then she does something neither of you had truly imagined. She pulls a ribbon from her sleeve and ties it around your wrist, not as a binding, but as a beginning, because the letters are no longer secret, the vows no longer veiled. And the next thing you write won't be hidden in cloth or hollowed saints. It will be read by others, by future hearts, by history maybe, but most importantly, by each other. The ceremony is small, not because it must be, but because it should be. The bishop insists on a blessing, more political than religious, and the abbot, begrudgingly amused, grants use of the lower chapel, the one with the faded murals and soft acoustics that make every whispered word sound like prayer. You wear no robe, no ring, no crest. Just your ink-stained hands and the ribbon she gave you, now tied cleanly around your left wrist. She arrives not in a gown, but in a cloak of her own making, embroidered with every symbol you once deciphered in secret, the birds, the tree, the nest, and in the very center of her back, stitched so faintly you nearly miss it, the key. Renaud is there. Naturally. Perched somewhere overhead in the chapel's beams, watching as if he planned this all along. Celeste stands just behind Avellini, holding a small satchel of scrolls, her expression daring anyone to call this anything but legitimate. And you? You take her hand. Without hesitation. Without apology. The bishop doesn't ask you to recite traditional vows. He just opens the parchment you submitted 3 days ago, your mutual agreement, written plainly, signed not in title, but in thread. It's not a contract. Not quite a prayer. It's a promise. One that reads, we will build something that does not need hiding. We will write until they remember we were here. We will keep the key, not as owners, but as those who never had one, and learned to make their own. He reads it aloud. Slowly. Softly. And when he finishes, he looks up with a rare smile and says, then let it be so. No trumpet. No feast. Just the two of you, turning to face a world that now sees what it almost missed. That night you return to the tower one last time, not as a hiding place, but a beginning. You carry in your arms a new box, not for storage, but for sharing. Avellini adds the latest piece of embroidery to the shelf, and you ping your first correct letter to the wall. It starts, "To the next 2 people who try this," and ends with, "May your pigeons be swift. May your metaphors survive scrutiny. May your secrets become songs." You lie beside her on the stone bench, candle burning low, stars pressing against the windows with quiet awe. And as sleep approaches, you trace your finger over the embroidery at her cuff. The birds, the key, and newly added, a door, wide open. And now, with the story told and the tower quiet again, let your mind drift with the last echoes of thread and ink. Picture the chapel garden beneath a soft night sky, where the hawthorn sways gently and the bench waits patiently for no one in particular. Imagine the scrolls, tucked neatly on the shelf, each one no longer locked behind secrecy, but resting in the open, warm with candlelight and care. There's no need to rush toward the ending. You're already there. The key rests beside the window now, not as a symbol of access denied, but of trust offered. It's no longer hidden, no longer feared. It lies quietly between 2 cups of wine, catching the moonlight just enough to remind you, love, when protected by silence, can still speak loudly, if you know where to listen. And if you listen now, really listen, you might just hear the rustle of embroidery threads being pulled through linen. You might hear the soft sound of a quill pausing in thought. Or maybe the sigh of someone resting beside someone they never thought they'd be allowed to love out loud. You don't have to remember every word. Just remember the feeling of wax softening under flame, of wings fluttering overhead, of a ribbon tied gently around a wrist, of something old and sacred made new again, not by fire or fight, but by patience, and quiet, and care. Let those details settle into your breathing now. Let them stretch out across your shoulders, your chest, your limbs. You're safe here, among the parchments and pigeons, among the stitched metaphors and hopeful glances. Sleep knows its way in. Let it come gently. Let it turn the last page. The candle's almost out now. The words have said enough. Rest easy. You were loved in this story. You still are. Hey guys. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means a lot and I look forward to bringing you new topics soon. Stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you